Good morning. Last week, Jesus taught and fed 5,000 people in the wilderness. And then he sends the apostles away while the 5,000 people are still there. And then he sends the 5,000 people away by himself after the apostles are gone. So we've got a sequence of operation going on in here. And immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side to Bethsaida while he himself was sending the crowd away. Now this word made here, where he made his disciples get into the boat, it's an authoritative command. It's a necessity. It's not like, hey, why don't you guys go get in the boat and start without me, I'll catch up to you later. It's like, leave. Get out of here, get in the boat, and go to Bethsaida. He wants them out of the way. And so they left Jesus on the other side of the lake. And then, after bidding the 5,000 farewell, he left for the mountains to pray. So the apostles are now out to sea, and Jesus has gone the other way and gone into the mountains. And when it was evening, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on dry land. So Mark's taken a little extra care to show the separation between them. They're getting farther and farther apart. So Jesus is not just one of the boys. The apostles and him are not just a team. He's the instructor. He's the master. And he had just sent them out on their own. He sent them out on their own, remember, to preach and to cast out demons. But they're still not independent of him. They're still not someone that's away from him. So that does not mean that they're ready to be on their own, or it does not mean that they are his equal. There's a separation that Mark is showing us. So Jesus praying is recorded only 3 times in Mark, and each time he's in a secluded place, it's at night, and he's always away from the apostles. And each time he prays in the book of Mark, there's a real danger of this mission or him being in distress or being destroyed or being misunderstood. So back in the first chapter in verse 35, Jesus goes off before daylight when nobody's watching, and he goes off to pray, and the apostles are looking for him. And when Peter finds him, he says, come on, everybody's looking for you. But that's not why Jesus was there. That was not his mission. That was not his purpose. So Jesus told Peter, he says, come on, let's go somewhere else to preach, because that's why I came. So at the end of the book, then, we also have a prayer, and that's in Gethsemane, when he's by himself and he's in the garden. And it's not just him and the apostles then, it's just him. So, in verse 48, seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, at about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. So Mark tells us why Jesus is walking on the water. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and he sees them in distress. Notice that Jesus sees them fighting the wind. They're out to sea. He's back on dry land. He's up in the mountains. They're in the middle of the lake. So, and it's dark out. This is the human Jesus that we're looking at, that we can see. But a human can't see out into the lake from the mountains, and a human can't see in the middle of the night. So we've got more than just the man, the physical man, Jesus here. And they're straining at the oars. And I had a footnote in my Bible that says that this word means being harassed at rowing, being tortured by the wind. Have you ever been in a rowboat or a canoe when a big 30, 40 mile an hour wind goes up? That's tough going. I got a friend of mine, Ben Crampton. He was up in the Porcupine Mountains in a canoe, and a big wind came up, and he's fighting that. And he could see some guys on the shore. They were actually DNR guys, and they were screaming out to him as loud as they could. And what they were saying to him was, get in the middle of the canoe. If you ever get in a canoe and you're fighting the wind, get in the middle. If you're on one end, it's going to push you like a windshield washer. Get in the middle, get toward the front, and keep that thing down. So Mark tells us that they're into distress, and they're getting into trouble. But this isn't a storm like before, when he was asleep and he stopped the wind and the waves. This is just a mighty headwind, and they're not making any progress. But then it says, He intended to pass by them. And you always got to wonder, why would Mark put this little detail in here? It says Jesus' intention was to pass by them, but it doesn't say that he intended to pass by them unnoticed. So he's not saying Jesus was trying to sneak around them and they accidentally saw him. His miracle wasn't as good as we thought it should have been. It doesn't say he was trying to be unnoticed, but it says he was passing by them. So they're rowing as hard as they can. They're not making any progress. The wind's blowing. And they look up and here comes Jesus walking by them. Kind of like running a race and you're being passed by a pregnant woman pushing twins in a stroller. That didn't happen to me, but it could happen. So this is what is intended here. Intended to pass them by walking on the sea. And this passing by, when you have the Lord passing by, this is an Old Testament expression that is loaded with theological meaning. It is an expression of the revelation of God and the character of God. If you go back to the golden calf incident, remember they were in the wilderness, Jesus went up on the mountain, Aaron builds a golden calf, and they all fall down and start worshiping and having a big party. And then God told Moses, because of this, I promised you I'll get you to the land to Abraham, the promised land that I promised to Abraham. I promised you I'll get you and I'll get you there, but I'm not going in your midst. And Moses petitions the Lord on his behalf and on behalf of the people. And he says, if you don't go in our midst, don't send us. We don't want to go without you. We need you in our midst. And that's when the tabernacle started getting put together. But then Moses says, I pray you, show me your glory. Notice there's an exclamation point there. He's not asking him. He's telling. He's telling God, show me your glory. It's a command. He's shouting it at God. Show me your glory. And God then says three things. He says, okay, I'll make my goodness pass before you. I will proclaim the name of I am, of Jehovah, before you, the name I gave you at the burning bush, and I'll be gracious. He tells him three things here. And so this is what he says. And he said, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim the Lord, the name of the Lord before you, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show compassion on whom I will show compassion. He said, but you cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live. Then the Lord said, behold, there's a place by me, and you shall stand there on the rock. And it came about, while my glory is passing by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take my hand away, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. So preparations had to be made even to see the trailing edge of the glory of God go by. And the next chapter, it happened. Then the Lord passed by in front of him and proclaimed, the Lord, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness and truth, who keeps loving kindness for thousands, who forgives iniquity, transgressions, and sin. So 4 times in this account it speaks about the Lord passing by. And when the Lord did pass by, we're not told what Moses saw. We're only told what Moses heard. Now I want to jump ahead 500 years to the time of Elijah. And Elijah is told by God, I want you to go all the way back down to Mount Sinai. Back to where it all started. Back to where I first revealed myself to Moses. And he said, go forth and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And look what happened when he got there. And behold, the Lord was passing by. So there are 2 men here that are going to appear with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. They're the 2 who saw the glory of the Lord passing by on Mount Sinai. But Job's words really ring out here. And if you remember way back in our Job class, we brought this out. God is talking, and he says, who alone stretches the heavens. He's talking of God. Who alone stretches the heaven and tramples down the waves of the sea. Were he to pass by me, I would not see him. Were he to move past me, I would not perceive him. So we have God here who can trample, the only one who can trample down and walk on the sea. Men can't do that. And if he came by, I wouldn't be able to see him because he's God, because he's a spirit, and men can't do that anyway. But now Mark is showing that God did trample down the waves of the sea, and now in Jesus they can see him. For they all saw him, and they were terrified. But immediately he spoke with them and said to them, take courage. It is I, do not be afraid. And that it is I is literally I am. This is an I am statement by Jesus. Jesus is now declaring that he is deity, that he is God. If the allusions to the great I am were not clear enough, Jesus comes right out and declares it. This is a declaration of Jesus' deity. So here, the invisible God is now visible. The mysterious God is now tangible. God is in human form. The Word became flesh. This is the great I am passing by, but now they can see his glory. We beheld his glory, which is what John says. And the reason he is there is because he saw them from a distance in the dark and is watching over them. Jesus is going to make this claim in Mark one more time, and it's at the very end. It's at his trial, and this is what gets him crucified. But he kept silent and did not answer. And again, the high priest was questioning him and saying to him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus said, I am. And you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. So look at all the things that Jesus ties together here. He ties the whole book of Mark together. He ties the whole Old Testament together. He's the Messiah, the Christ. He's the Son of God, the promised Son of David. He's God himself. He's the great I am, and he's the Son of Man from Daniel chapter 7. He puts it all in there, and then you know what they say? We don't need any more proof. And that's why they put him to death. We have heard it said many times that Mark doesn't show that Jesus was deity. And the source critics say, well, Mark didn't know it at the time. That was something that got developed later on. But if you read Mark closely, he tells that Jesus is divine on every single page of his book. So John presents Jesus as God. He presents him as deity. Mark presents Jesus as king on a cross. But Mark also presents Jesus as deity on nearly every page. Mark is presented as the early gospel, that he is the incomplete gospel. He got his information from unknown sources, and then some people kind of build off Mark. And the latter gospels straightened out what Mark didn't know. Nonsense. In chapter 1, we saw this at the very beginning. It's the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, Son of God, as is written in the prophet Isaiah, behold, I send my messenger ahead of you to prepare the way for you. Mark says that Jesus is the one that Isaiah was talking about. John the Baptist is preparing the way for Jesus, but Isaiah says he's preparing the way for Yahweh. So in verse 3 it says, make ready for the way of Yahweh, make his path straight. John the Baptist makes the path straight for Jehovah, and Jesus shows up. So from the very beginning, we know that Jesus is deity. Jesus is God. In chapter 2 and verse 7, Jesus forgives sins. And the scribe said, no, only God can forgive sins. But then Jesus proves that he forgave sins by making the paralytic man walk. And then in chapter 3, he casts out demons, not through some other power, not even praying. He casts out demons on his own power. Chapter 4, he says, I've got the power to tie Satan up and plunder his house. And then he calms the storm. And the apostles themselves said, who can do this? Only God can do this. And in Psalm 107, it says, Jehovah is the one who can calm the storm. Then in chapter 5, Jairus' daughter is raised from the dead. In the Old Testament, Elijah raised somebody from the dead, but he had to ask Jehovah. He had to pray Jehovah. Jesus just does it. And in chapter 6, he feeds the 5,000 in the wilderness, and God gave manna in the wilderness. And then he walks on water, and Job says God alone can walk on water. Chapter 7, he heals a deaf mute, but at the burning bush, when God first made himself known to Moses, he made this claim. The Lord said, who has made a man's mouth, or who makes him a mute or deaf or seeing the blind? Is it not I, the Lord? The Lord's the one that can make deaf people hear. And again, he feeds the 5,000 in the wilderness in chapter 8. And in chapter 9, we have the transfiguration. Only 2 people climb that mountain to commune with the Lord. It's Moses in Exodus 24 and Elijah in 1 Kings 19. But they then disappear, and only Jesus is there, and God says, listen to him. In chapter 9 or 10, he heals the blind, like we saw in Exodus chapter 4. Only God can heal the blind. In chapter 11, Jesus says, this is the temple, this is my house. It's the house of God, and Jesus says it's my house. And in chapter 12, he raises someone he talks about the resurrection of the dead, and he says they neither marry or given marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. And the only reason he could know that is if he had been there. And in chapter 12 also, he shows that he's the son of David who sits on the right hand of God from Psalm 110. And in chapter 14, at the trial, he comes right out and says, I'm the great I am. And Mark puts an exclamation point on his book by showing Jesus is God. So when somebody says, now that was fast, the whole book, but when somebody says, Mark didn't know Jesus was deity, Mark tells us Jesus is deity on every single page of his book. And that's not even his main point. That's just incidental information. Okay, back to our lesson. Then he got in the boat with them, and the wind stopped, and they were utterly astonished. And that seems kind of natural to me. If I was out in the storm paddling around and a guy come walking by, I would probably be astonished. Jesus walked on water in a storm, and he got into the boat, the wind stopped. Kind of like the last time when he was sleeping in the boat, and when he woke up, he just stopped the wind and the waves. But look at the reason that Mark gives for them being astonished. For they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their heart was hardened. And hold on to that loaves thing. That comes up a couple more times in Mark. We always have to remember the storyline. Try to follow the entire storyline. It's important later. So the miracle of loaves was not for the 5,000. The miracle of the loaves was for the 12. Remember when we looked at that, they went back to Jesus every time and got more bread and then handed it out to the groups that they had set in the 50s and 100s. So the people all sectioned off. They come up to Jesus, we're running low on bread. Well, here, take these baskets out. So they take that out and they come back. I don't know that the people knew where that came from, but the apostles did. This was a miracle for the apostles. Every time they came back, they had more bread, and when they got done, there were 12 baskets full. And 12 is a real biblical number. That's the number of the tribes. That's the number of the apostles. So now Jesus sends them back to the boat, and each one of them has a basket full of bread when they didn't have that much to start with. They've got more now than they had when they had all combined together. Each of them had a reminder in their hand of what had just happened, what they had just witnessed. Jesus didn't just feed 5,000. He gave a basket to each of them, and he was teaching the 12. But now Mark says, you missed the point. They didn't get it. They didn't gain any insight as to what happened then or what's happening now. So that word insight is pretty informative. It means the assembling of individual facts into an organized whole as collecting the pieces of a puzzle and putting them together. The mind grasps concepts and sees the proper relationship between them. So it's not like they just saw one miracle here and one miracle here. They're supposed to be putting this together. We saw this, we saw this. Look at all the things that they've seen. Look at all the things that they've heard. And they're not putting it together. They're just doing individual things and thinking, wow, that was a good trick. They failed to grasp this even a point, that it's a point beyond itself. And it's evidence of Jesus' person. They're missing that whole point. They failed to put it all together. All of the things that they had witnessed, the healing, the teaching, the casting out of demons, the shutting off of a major storm, the raising of the dead, they hadn't put anything together. They hadn't gained any insight whatsoever from all of the things that they had witnessed. Putting these together, all together these points, is something greater than just a free meal or just a magic act. So this word insight means that they hadn't put anything together And it's the same word that Jesus uses in chapter 4 when he quotes Isaiah. So when he goes back to, and he quotes Isaiah, he said to them, to you has been given the mystery of the kingdom of God. But to those who are outside, they get everything in parables. So that they, here's an Isaiah quote, while seeing they may see, not perceive, and while hearing they may hear, and not put it all together. Otherwise, they might return and be forgiven. They're not gaining any insight. So the word understand here is the word that God uses to tell Isaiah that nobody's going to listen to your message, because even though you give all these different proofs and all these different reasons and all these different miracles, they're not going to put it together. So the word understand is the same word that they didn't gain any insight. And notice, it's the apostles themselves who are now the outsiders. The apostles themselves are the ones that don't get it. And so it was given to them in parables, but they're now getting it live and in color. This is a living parable that they're getting, and they're missing it. And their hearts are hardening. And sometimes I think that's a little discouraging, but sometimes I think it's a little encouraging to me. And two reasons. They didn't get it. Sometimes I don't get it. So I don't feel so bad. Not that I should give up, but I'm not going to get it all right away. Number two is, Jesus didn't give up on them. They didn't get it. He didn't give up on them. He's going to be beating this stuff into these guys right until the cross. They don't get it, they don't get it, they don't get it, and it seems to get worse. The reason Mark is presenting it this way is not just because it happened or just because for those people or for the apostles. It's for us, the reader. That's what we're supposed to be. It isn't written for the people in the story. It isn't written for the apostles. It's written for us. It's written for us readers. And we will recognize, and our hearts will not be hardened. So we won't misunderstand Jesus, and we will recognize him and his kingdom. Now, when they crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and moored on the shore. Look where they wound up, Gennesaret. Let's back up. Where did Jesus send them? Immediately, Jesus made the disciples to get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side to Bethsaida, while he himself was sending them away. There's Gennesaret. There's Bethsaida. They're in the wrong place. Jesus sent them to Bethsaida. They didn't make it. Got blown off course or something. They're in the wrong place. And so, a lot of times you say that Mark made a mistake and he couldn't keep track of where he was at, and he wrote this down, he got it from somebody else. But that's what you get when you have a fragmented reading of Scripture. Looking for mistakes rather than looking for meaning. So if we spend some time here and try to get some meaning out of this, we're going to see that Mark's using a literary device. Their failure to reach Bethsaida mirrors their failure to understand Jesus. They don't understand, they don't perceive, they don't recognize, and so they don't arrive at where they're supposed to be. The apostles don't recognize who and what Jesus is. But now we're supposed to see what happens when they arrive at Gennesaret. I want to break this down into 4 separate things of what happens in this passage of Scripture. When they got out of a boat, immediately the people recognize him. The people recognize him immediately. The apostles don't. So he's drawn a contrast here. He's making a comparison here. Mark never tells us that he's been here before. And it is like the apostles didn't know who he was, and they have heard everything that he has said, and they have seen everything that he has done. So the people immediately recognized Jesus. But second, and they ran out that whole country and began to carry here and there on their pallets those who were sick. We've been reading since the beginning. What do we know about carrying people on pallets? They carried a guy on a pallet, tore the roof off a house and lowered him down, and what did Jesus say? Great faith, your sins are forgiven. And the scribe said, you can't forgive sins, which is easier? So Mark is using this, everybody's carrying somebody on pallets, and he's drawing us back to what happened before. Jesus, seeing their faith, said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." So the people are carrying people on pallets to Jesus. They're people of faith. So they immediately recognize Jesus. Second, they brought people on pallets. And third, whenever he entered villages or cities or countryside, they are laying the sick in their marketplaces and imploring him that he might just touch the fringe of their cloak, of his cloak, and they were touched and they were cured. Where have we heard that one before? That's the woman who had the issue of blood. She had the issue of blood. She touched his cloak. So in chapter 5, we have this woman that snuck up behind, and he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, be healed of your affliction." We saw that being made well means forgiven. So here, Mark is drawing us back. We're supposed to be reading this from the beginning. And he's drawing us back to things that he's already said. The apostles don't get it, but these people do get it. These people get it because they're doing what they've already heard about. So Mark is comparing hardened hearts and the apostles to the faith of the people of Gennesaret, who ran to the place, and notice, they ran to the place where they heard. Now we're all the way back to chapter 4, and we're talking about the parable of the sower and the seed. The good seed are the ones that heard it, and they believed it, and they had faith. So Mark's tying everything together here. The apostles have seen and heard more than any. And I think Mark uses the apostles as a foil. And you know what a foil is when you're watching? That's the bad guy. You always got, in the old westerns, you always had, the good guys had the white horse and the white hat, and the bad guys had the black hat. Mark's presenting the apostles as the foil, because these people ran to the place where they heard he was. So we have the hearing, we have them running to the place, we have them believing, we have them lowering people on pallets, we have them touching the fringe of the garment. He's pulling everything in here about these people, and he's never been there before. Now, this is a cartoon that some of you may not remember, Rocky and Bullwinkle. And this is just an image or an illustration of the foil. Rocky and Bullwinkle were the good guys. Boris and Natasha were the Russians, the Soviets, the Soviet Russian. Because this is back in the 1959, I think the first one came out. So when I was a little kid, we watched Rocky and Bullwinkle. And one of the cartoons that they had on Rocky and Bullwinkle was Dudley Do-Right. And Dudley Do-Right was a Mountie and he was a doofus. And he couldn't figure anything out. And this guy tied up down here, his name was Snidely. So Snidely was down here. His name was Snidely Whiplash. He's cunning, selfish, melodramatic, evil, deceptive. So we got this foil. We got a secondary foil in here too, and that was Nell Fenwick. And she's the one he always rescues, but she's actually smarter than he is. So we've got these foils. I found one more here. Back in 1971, Sammy Davis Jr., who was a singer and a dancer, one of the greatest live entertainers that probably ever lived, he decided that he could beat up Will Chamberlain, one of the greatest in the NBA that ever lived. And so they put this boxing match on there. And so I think Sammy Davis Jr. was supposed to be the foil, and the one that was accused was, and I'm not going to tell you how this fight turned out because it's a world-shattering event. So we got foils. We've got people that are the good guys. We've got people that are the bad guys. We got people that are getting it. We got people that aren't. So in literature, a foil is any person who, through contrast, underscores the distinctive characteristics of another. The foil acts as a mirror, helping the reader better understand the character's true nature, strengths, and weaknesses. So we look at the apostles and we go, hey, man, they missed that. I would have got that. I would have figured that out. But look at these other people. They heard, they believed, they came, they replicated the stuff they heard. Pallets and touching the fringe of the garment. And so Mark is pulling us into this story, the way it's written. And he wants us then to make a decision. Mark wants us to see what the people of Gennesaret heard, and he wants to recognize Jesus and run to Jesus. And the apostles apparently literally missed the boat. The apostles are the foil in the contrast of the people of Gennesaret and the people throughout the entire book, so that we might see, so that we might put it all together, so that we might be the insiders who make a decision of what to think and do about Jesus. So this book is written for us, the reader. Now, I want to look ahead a couple chapters. I want to keep this whole thought going. Jesus is going to feed thousands again, this time 4,000. And then he and the apostles are going to get into a boat again. Same story. Keeps happening over and over again. And the apostles start worrying about bread. We didn't bring anything to eat. Jesus has just fed 4,000 people. They got back into a boat just like they did the last time. And the people start worrying, oh, we don't have any bread. Remember last time he gave us, I had a basket of bread last time. He didn't give us anything. We didn't bring any bread. I was counting on him to bring some bread. Why didn't you bring any bread? Jesus is trying to teach them, and they're worried about food. Jesus again says here that they have a hardened heart, and then he gives them a test. We're going to have a test. Do you guys remember how much food was left over when I fed 5,000? Do you remember how much food was left over when I fed 4,000? Don't you understand yet? And now, they finally make it to Bethsaida, where they started out chapters before, and they came to Bethsaida. They're finally there. They came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. So Jesus takes this blind man by the hand and leads him outside the village, so that the only people that see this miracle take place is the apostles. This miracle isn't for everybody. It's for the apostles and, of course, for us reading. This is a teaching moment. This is another living parable. This is the man that Jesus lays his hands on twice. The first time, he can see a little bit, but it's not clear. It's like men, but it's like trees. And then he has to do it again. And then he says, I can see clearly now. He had just told the apostles, you don't see clearly. You don't understand yet. Can't you put 2 and 2 together and wind up with 4? So this healing is a living parable. You guys aren't getting it yet. You're not seeing clearly yet. I performed a miracle. You still don't get it. I'm going to perform some more miracles until you do get it. So this healing isn't a failure on the top of Jesus. It's a literary device on the part of Mark to tell us this. And right after this, then Peter's going to make this great confession. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And this is the big turning point in Mark's gospel. And Jesus begins to tell of the suffering and the resurrection. But Peter still doesn't get it. Peter says, you are the Messiah. And Jesus says, you're Satan. Because Peter does not understand the suffering Messiah. And Mark is teaching the suffering Messiah, the gospel according to Isaiah. Now, that's where our flow chart comes in. Remember at the beginning we had this flow chart? Now we can see where we're at and how Mark is putting this story together. So we moved a little rapidly to see what's going on here. Now next week we'll go back and slow down to where we were. Thanks for coming.